The attack had already landed by the time I walked into the courtroom. Papers were spread across polished wood like debris after an explosion. Clerks whispered too fast. Reporters leaned forward with that hungry stillness I recognized from bad news nights. My name was already echoing in a space where I hadn't spoken yet, and somehow that was the loudest sound in the room. I stayed seated while everything moved around me. Lawyers shuffled exhibits. A trustee adjusted his glasses and reread the same page twice. Someone behind me exhaled sharply, like panic had waked. I felt oddly detached, watching it all as if it were happening to a version of me already written into the record. Trevor stood near the front, relaxed, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on his attorney's chair. He smiled when he caught my eye. Not a friendly smile. A satisfied one. The kind that assumes the ending is already decided. He leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something that made them both glance at me, then back to the judge's bench. Our parents sat 2 rows behind him. My mother nodded along to whatever Trevor was saying, lips pressed thin in approval. My father didn't look at me at all. He stared straight ahead, shoulders squared, as if neutrality could be mistaken for dignity. When Trevor's lawyer mentioned my name, my mother's chin lifted slightly. Alignment without words. The filing number was read aloud. Case details followed. Then the amount, $1,200,000, spoken clearly, deliberately, like a sentence meant to bruise. I heard a murmur ripple through the benches. Trevor turned just enough to see the reaction. He enjoyed that part. He said my name then. Not loudly. Confidently. He didn't need volume. This will be public, he added, eyes flicking toward the reporters. Every dollar. Every failure. I finally looked up. Not at him. At the ceiling. At the lights. At the structure holding all of this together. They thought this was about money. It wasn't. The courtroom was in downtown Chicago, bankruptcy division, 3rd floor, where the air always felt recycled and too cold. Judge Eleanor Briggs hadn't entered yet, but her presence was already there, hanging in the way everyone lowered their voices instinctively. The seal behind the bench caught the fluorescent light, sharp and unforgiving. Reporters filled the last row, phones angled low, thumbs hovering, waiting for something worth sending. Paper whispered constantly. Filings slid across desks. A clerk tapped a keyboard, paused, then tapped again harder, like accuracy mattered more when tension thickened. The wooden benches creaked under shifting weight. Someone coughed and immediately looked embarrassed for making noise. I kept my hands folded, spine straight, eyes forward, giving nothing away. Trevor's lawyer stood before the bench, dark suit, narrow tie, confidence polished to a shine. He spoke with practiced sympathy, voice smooth, controlled, pausing after numbers so they could sink in. He kept referring to me as the debtor, never my name, as if distance itself were evidence. When he glanced back, it wasn't to check on Trevor. It was to measure me. Judge Briggs entered without ceremony. No gavel slam. Just presence. Conversations died mid-sentence. She sat, adjusted her glasses once, and scanned the room slowly, deliberately. When her eyes passed over me, they didn't linger, but I felt seen anyway. Not judged. Catalogued. Trevor leaned back, arms crossed, whispering to my mother. She nodded again. Always nodding. My father stared at his hands. As the judge reviewed the filing, her pen scratched softly, steady and precise. I listened to every word, every inflection. I didn't interrupt. I didn't react. Calm wasn't strategy yet. It was survival. Because this room wasn't chaos. It was a lock closing. I've seen this pattern long before any courtroom papers ever existed. Growing up, Trevor had the golden key to everything. Grades, praise, allowances, our parents' attention. I was the one learning to make myself invisible, to absorb the quiet disappointment instead of earning a medal or a smile. He never had to ask for anything twice. I learned early that asking was dangerous. It invited judgment. Money was always his tool, subtly wielded. He'd borrow my allowance when we were teens, and somehow it became my fault when a math error left me short at the store. Parents never intervened. They praised him for asserting himself while I apologized for existing. I calculated every misstep, every uneven dollar, and tucked them away. Not for him. Not for them. For me. Trevor thrived on control. Every dinner, every family outing, every casual conversation had his signature stamp. A joke disguised as authority, a question framed as a test. I could read it in his smirk, the flick of his wrist, the measured pause before he let laughter echo. Even now, years later, his obsession with status and perception shaped every move he made. Mom's gaze lingered on him like a spotlight. Dad's voice softened at Trevor's insistence, even when wrong. And through it all, I kept quiet, cataloguing, observing, building a ledger of each slight. Every favor I did, every compromise, every overlooked insult stacked like invisible currency. I didn't know how I'd spend it yet, but I knew it was mine. Every time Trevor flexed, every time my parents enabled him, I learned. Every whispered scorn and financial manipulation engraved itself into my awareness. I knew one day, the power balance would shift, and I would be ready. The moment Trevor's lawyer slid the papers across the mahogany table, the word bankruptcy felt like a hammer striking the room. Cameras clicked. Reporters murmured. The judge's gavel tapped twice, commanding attention. Trevor's grin was sharp, smug, fully aware of the chaos he'd unleashed. "He's responsible for the mess," his lawyer said, voice crisp and rehearsed, waving a stack of documents I'd studied 1,000 times in my mind. Whispers slithered across the benches. Journalists typed furiously, recording every detail. The number, 7 digits, glaring on the filing, hovered like a neon sign in my vision. $1,250,000. My family's wealth reduced to a fraction of its history by his calculated words. Parents sat rigid, faces carefully neutral, eyes flicking between him and me, silently signaling who held power. I felt the heat in the room, the tension like electricity, but my expression remained calm, impassive. I measured everything, the judge's posture, the slight twitch in the court clerk's pen, the way the reporters leaned forward, anticipating my reaction. Trevor thrived on this, the perception of fear, of emotional collapse. But I refused. Inside, my thoughts raced, cataloguing each accusation, each misstatement. Every figure he claimed, every document he waved, I had already anticipated. Every miscalculation, every loophole, every legal misstep, I had memorized. The court was his stage, but I wasn't the actor he assumed I would be. Silence was my armor. The gallery murmured. A faint camera shutter clicked. Trevor's eyes flicked to mine, searching for a crack. There wasn't one. Every breath I took was deliberate, controlled. They believed I would crumble. They were wrong. The public filing was a spectacle, but I had my own script, written quietly long before anyone had ever imagined the loudest thing in the room the moment I chose it. I didn't object when Trevor's lawyer spoke. I didn't interrupt when figures were repeated incorrectly. I didn't even look up when my name was framed as a cautionary tale. To everyone watching, my quiet read like surrender. You could feel it shift the air. The reporters leaned back, disappointed, already rewriting headlines in their heads. My stillness was interpreted as collapse. Trevor mistook it for victory immediately. His posture changed. He leaned back in his chair, crossed one ankle over the other, and let his confidence spill into every gesture. When his attorney paused, Trevor filled the space with a low chuckle, the kind meant to humiliate without words. He glanced toward the gallery, making sure people noticed. He wanted witnesses to my supposed downfall. Silence, to him, meant I had nothing left. My parents stepped into their roles effortlessly. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, shaking her head as if burdened by disappointment. My father sighed loudly, the sound designed to travel. Their faces displayed practiced outrage, not at Trevor's actions, but at my failure to stop him. They didn't look at me directly. They looked past me, as if I were already erased. Performance had always come easily to them. The judge noticed everything. He didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't scold. He simply watched. His eyes moved from Trevor to me, then to the documents, then back again. He let the silence stretch longer than was comfortable. Court clerks shifted. A reporter cleared his throat. The judge's stillness felt intentional, like he was measuring something invisible. I kept my hands folded. I kept my breathing even. Inside, I was cataloguing. Every assumption being made about me. Every conclusion being drawn too early. They believed silence meant weakness because they had never used it as a weapon. They thought this moment belonged to Trevor. I let them think that. What they didn't know was that nothing happening in that courtroom was new to me. The panic, the accusations, the numbers spoken with theatrical certainty. I had already lived with them quietly, privately, long before Trevor decided to make a spectacle of it. While he rehearsed confidence, I prepared in silence. While he assumed permanence, I mapped timelines. I never rushed. I watched patterns repeat, then wrote them down. I kept copies of everything. Emails that changed tone. Notices that arrived out of sequence. Filing dates that didn't align with claims made aloud. I learned how to read what wasn't emphasized, what was hidden behind procedural language. I didn't confront. I didn't warn. I let assumptions grow heavy. Trevor mistook my lack of reaction for ignorance, never imagining I was tracking every step with precision. The truth was, this didn't begin with the filing. It began months earlier, when control first tightened and explanations grew vague. When numbers were referenced but never shared. When authority was asserted without proof. I started asking questions quietly, the kind that don't trigger alarms. I built a timeline no one else saw forming, one document at a time, each piece small enough to dismiss alone. There was one person who noticed. A single moral ally, careful and unflashy, who never promised rescue. He simply explained processes, pointed to statutes, and reminded me that silence didn't mean absence. He never spoke about Trevor with judgment. He spoke about systems. About leverage. About patience. He treated me like someone capable, not someone cornered. So when they looked at me in court and saw nothing, they were wrong. What they didn't know was that my quiet wasn't empty. It was structured. It was deliberate. And it was already complete. The first crack didn't sound dramatic. It sounded like a pause. The trustee stopped flipping pages and leaned closer to the filing, lips pressing together, pen hovering instead of moving. Papers rustled again, slower this time, the confidence of routine replaced with something more careful. Trevor didn't notice at first. He was still leaning back, jacket unbuttoned, chin lifted as if the outcome had already been signed. The judge adjusted his glasses and asked for clarification on a date. Just a date. Trevor's attorney answered too quickly, then corrected himself mid-sentence. The courtroom shifted in a way you can't rehearse. Benches creaked. A reporter stopped typing. I felt it before anyone said anything else, the moment when momentum loses its footing. The trustee asked why a liability appeared twice under different entities. Same amount. Same creditor. Different descriptions. Trevor finally leaned forward, smile tightening, fingers tapping once against the table before going still. His lawyer whispered, voice sharp and low. I watched Trevor nod too fast, the way people do when they're trying to keep pace with something slipping. The judge asked another question, this one about disclosure. About prior transfers. About why supporting documentation referenced an account number that wasn't listed anywhere else in the filing. Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. Administrative silence. The kind that stretches because no one wants to answer wrong. Trevor cleared his throat. He spoke, then stopped, glanced at his lawyer, then spoke again, slower. Confidence thinned into irritation. Irritation into calculation. I stayed exactly where I was, hands folded, eyes down, listening. I didn't look at him when the trustee requested additional verification. I didn't react when the judge marked a note in the margin. By the time the word inconsistency was spoken, Trevor's posture had changed. Shoulders tight. Jaw locked. Control no longer assumed, now defended. And for the first time, I knew the room could feel it. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't look at Trevor when he asked it. He looked at the file, then at the trustee, then back down again, like he already knew the answer and was only checking whether anyone else did. His pen paused mid-air. Mr. Hale, he said, calm and even. Can you explain why the asset listed on Schedule A was transferred out of your name 11 months before this filing, yet is still represented here as current personal property? Nothing moved. Not a gasp. Not a cough. Not a shuffle of feet. The silence dropped straight down, heavy and immediate, like the room had lost oxygen. Trevor's lawyer froze, mouth slightly open, eyes flicking sideways without turning his head. Trevor blinked once. Then again. Too slow. The trustee looked up sharply. Papers were lifted. Pages turned fast now, not slow. Purpose replaced routine. A finger traced a line. Then stopped. The trustee's voice was careful when she spoke, as if choosing words that could survive later review. Your Honor, she said, the transfer appears to have been executed through a shell entity. The consideration listed doesn't align with market value. And the timing coincides with outstanding creditor notices. Trevor shook his head before anyone accused him of anything. Just once. A reflex. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Trevor pulled back, palms flattening on the table like he could physically hold the moment in place. His jaw worked. No sound came out. The judge finally looked at him. Bankruptcy protection requires full and honest disclosure, he said. Misrepresentation is not a technical error. It is fraud. The word landed without emphasis. That made it worse. A reporter's pen dropped. Someone in the gallery inhaled too loudly and then stopped. Trevor's confidence didn't explode. It deflated. His shoulders sagged by inches. His eyes darted, searching for someone to interrupt, to explain, to rescue him from the math of his own choices. I stayed still. Screens were turned. Documents referenced. Dates aligned themselves into a story Trevor had assumed no one would read closely. His name appeared and reappeared where it shouldn't have. The shell company dissolved under scrutiny. The room watched it happen in real time. The judge asked for the record to reflect the discrepancy. No one spoke over him. And in that silence, louder than any accusation, Trevor finally understood. The court wasn't confused anymore. The ruling didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with procedure. The judge reviewed the trustee's notes, adjusted his glasses, and spoke as if closing a door he'd already decided to shut. The petition was dismissed without prejudice, he said, due to material misrepresentation. The words sounded clean. Final. Trevor's lawyer didn't object. He couldn't. The case number was read once more, then marked inactive, like a pulse flatlining on a screen no one wanted to watch. Then came the referrals. The judge didn't look at Trevor when he mentioned them. He looked forward, addressing the room, the record, the system itself. The matter would be referred to the U.S. trustee program for further review. Potential sanctions. Possible civil exposure. He paused just long enough for Trevor to understand that this wasn't ending today. It was beginning somewhere colder. Trevor sat back slowly, like gravity had finally found him. His mouth opened, then closed. His hands slid off the table and landed uselessly in his lap. No one leaned toward him now. His lawyer gathered papers without meeting his eyes. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had nowhere to stand. My parents didn't speak. My mother's lips pressed together, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the bench as if refusing to witness what had just happened. My father stared at the floor, jaw tight, one hand gripping the edge of the pew like it was the only solid thing left. They didn't defend him. They didn't look at me. Silence wrapped around them, thick and unforgiving. Trevor finally turned, searching for reassurance, for outrage, for someone to say this was unfair. He found only distance. Even the reporters had shifted away, already chasing the next angle. He was alone in a room full of people, exposed not by shouting, but by process. I stood when instructed. Calm. Unremarkable. And for the first time, no one tried to stop me. After the courtroom emptied, nothing snapped back into place. My parents didn't wait for me in the hallway. They didn't argue with each other. They walked out separately, already fractured, already choosing distance over explanation. I watched my mother check her phone like it might tell her how to feel. I watched my father stare at a wall as if it had answers he preferred over mine. No one asked if I was okay. No one apologized. That silence felt permanent. Trevor didn't approach me. He stood near the elevators with his lawyer, voice low, hands shaking just enough to be visible. When the doors opened, he hesitated, then stepped inside without looking back. That was the last time I saw him up close. No confrontation. No final insult. Just retreat. The kind that rewrites a person quietly. The calls started later. My mother first. Her voice careful, edited, full of pauses. She talked around the subject, never through it. She said the family had been under stress. She said Trevor hadn't meant for it to go this far. She didn't ask how it felt to be publicly accused. She asked how long I planned to stay distant. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. I was just no longer available. My father left a voicemail 2 days after that. 30 seconds. Mostly breathing. He said my name once, like a test. I didn't call back. Nothing was repaired. No dinner invitations followed. No emotional reckoning arrived. The family adjusted around the damage like it was furniture no one wanted to acknowledge. I let them. Detachment wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I returned to my routines. I slept well. I stopped bracing for impact. Power, I learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just removes access. If you've ever watched people lose control the moment they can't rewrite the story anymore, you'll understand this ending. Let me know where you're watching from. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Not dramatically. No pause for effect. No glance back to see if anyone was watching. The heavy glass doors closed behind me with a muted thud, and the sound felt final in a way nothing inside that courtroom ever had. The air outside was colder than I expected, sharp enough to make me inhale fully for the first time all day. It felt earned. Trevor didn't follow. He couldn't. He was still inside, surrounded by people who no longer believed him, papers spread across a table like evidence of a life finally examined under proper light. The confidence that had carried him into the building had collapsed inward. I didn't need to see his face to know it. I had known him too long. I recognized the silence that comes when manipulation stops working. My parents exited later, separately. My mother avoided my eyes, her phone already in her hand, scrolling as if the world could be rearranged by refusing to look at what had just happened. My father nodded once in my direction, a stiff, incomplete gesture that carried more confusion than regret. They didn't call my name. They didn't apologize. They didn't ask how long I had been preparing. That told me everything I needed to know about the distance that now existed between us. Distance isn't always created by leaving. Sometimes it's created by finally standing still. I crossed the plaza slowly, my footsteps steady, my shoulders relaxed. Reporters were still clustered near the steps, voices overlapping, chasing reactions that would never come from me. Silence again. It followed me like a boundary instead of a shield now. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was choosing what deserved access. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. One message from an unknown number. Then another. I didn't read them. I already knew the tone. Panic arrives late, and it always sounds the same. I slid the phone back and kept walking. For years, I had been introduced as Trevor's sibling. As the quiet one. The dependable one. The one who handled things without making noise. That version of me had been useful to everyone except myself. Walking away from the courthouse, I understood that reclaiming your identity doesn't require an announcement. It requires consistency. Boundaries held even when no one applauds. The city moved around me, indifferent and alive. Traffic lights changed. People laughed into their phones. Somewhere, someone argued over coffee. Life continued without needing my family's approval, without Trevor's dominance shaping the room. That realization settled into my chest not as triumph, but as stability. Stability doesn't shake. It doesn't perform. It holds. I thought about everything I had lost trying to keep peace. Then I thought about what I hadn't lost at all. My competence. My patience. My ability to wait until the truth could speak for itself. Power had never belonged to the loudest voice in the room. It belonged to the person who could afford to be quiet until the right moment. At the curb, I stopped and finally looked back at the building. Not at the steps. Not at the doors. Just at the name carved above them. Justice isn't poetic. It's procedural. It's slow. And when it works, it doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like alignment. I turned away and headed toward my car. If you're watching this and wondering where you're listening from, tell me in the comments. Not because I need numbers, but because distance reminds us how many ways there are to walk away whole. They thought this was about money. It never was.